morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown! And today, we are looking at the latest self-titled record from Lamb of God! If you're including the 2 studio albums that this band recorded under the name Burn the Priest, then this is in fact the 10th studio album from Lamb of God in a nearly 21-year career. And that is a weird little factoid for me to wrap my head around, because I remember in the early mid-2000s when they were putting out records like As the Palaces Burn, Ashes of the Wake, Sacrament. I remember kids in my school talking about how heavy these albums were, how much different they were from the rock we knew of at the time, which was basically like Linkin Park, Green Day, Fall Out Boy. And I remember in college going to see Lamb of God here in Toronto with Killswitch Engage and Testament at the Cool House, a venue that doesn't even exist anymore. I remember at one point seeing the band live, and they even had this banner that read, "Pure fucking American metal." And while I don't much care for these kinds of statements coming from any kind of band, I do kind of have to agree with Lamb of God proclaiming themselves as that. But it seems as though we've reached a point in 2020 where people are starting to get a little bit tired with Lamb of God's brand of pure fucking American metal, as early reviews for this self-titled record were unenthusiastic and lukewarm at best, with the Metaltrist saying that the record felt formulaic and watered down, while Exclaim went as far as to say that they felt the band had reached a creative plateau. I won't argue that this is a particularly progressive record from Lamb of God. I think by now we all know exactly what type of album Lamb of God usually deliver, and this self-titled album doesn't stray too far from those expectations, but they do have some subtle yet effective tricks still up their sleeve. There's still a little bit of fuel in the creative tanks. And while that may not be enough to propel this album to the heights of their earliest and most iconic works, or even to the heights of a more recent record like Sturm und Drang, I will still argue that it is enough to ensure that Lamb of God can very much still retain the title of pure fucking American metal, delivering upon us everything that has defined Lamb of God and everything that has made them so entertaining in their 21-year career. The band's deep-fried, piss and vinegar-drenched sonic fusion of Teutonic thrash, groove-laden death, 90s metalcore, and old-school punk spirit, courtesy of the explosive Randy Blythe, very much remains intact and effective on this record, even if it has become a little bit predictable. I mean, y'all know the drill by now. It's a lot of mid-pace, chunky riffs, a lot of really big hoo-ah-oo from the aforementioned Randy Blythe, mostly 4-chord song structures, breakdowns and rhythm guitars with a little bit of a thrashy underbite to them, and despite the absence of Chris Adler, a very Chris Adler-esque performance that includes a lot of double bass and a lot of cymbals. Like I said, predictable. But I would argue that it's predictable in the same way that AC/DC is predictable. Like, we all know AC/DC. We all know what to expect from the blueprint of any AC/DC song, and as such, you could absolutely get away with calling them a generic hard rock band. But that being said, if I play you TNT right now, you know immediately that it's TNT. You don't sit there and go, maybe that's Highway to Hell. You don't sit there and go, could that be Back in Black? No. You know immediately that it's TNT. That's the same kind of predictable territory that Lamb of God now occupy. Sure, a lot of the songs flow the same way, but they never bleed together. They still feel distinct. They still feel like individual numbers flowing in their own unique patterns. And as I said before, I do think there are some subtle yet effective tricks that Lamb of God employ to help them branch out a little bit more, to make this album feel all the more slightly distinct from any one of their other records. For one, Lamb of God seems a lot more politically motivated and poignant on this record, reflecting on the last 4 years of political divisiveness, the Trump administration, and their frustrations with the state of American and global politics. Take, for instance, the track New Colossal Hate, where Randy Blythe tries to see what America looks like through the eyes of the Statue of Liberty and what that statue was supposed to represent. With lyrics like "Blood runs down her welcoming arms, her feral blood has turned neglectful, the chains she broke are rusting closed, imprisoned lightning burns forgetful, spoiled blind to the light that she holds." Even hearkening to the statue's iconic engravings with "Lash the tired and kill the poor, the huddled masses ram the door." Or in the album's lead single, Checkmate, which seems to take a much more urgent and blunt tone as Lamb of God direct all of their anger directly towards Donald Trump. With lyrics like "A coup d'etat on full display, a liar's sick charade, a traitor's grand parade, narcissistic masquerades for those without a say, systematic disarray, divide and conquer and close them in, and bury secrets deep, make America hate again and bleed the sheep to sleep." There's hardly anything new about bashing Donald Trump within the world of hard rock and heavy metal. Case in point, ladies and gentlemen. But I give credit to Lamb of God nonetheless, as they have always come across as being somewhat neutral, even despite Randy Blythe and his social media presence. Musically speaking, I like that the band is expanding on some of the more melodic ideas that dominated their previous record, Sturm und Drang. For instance, the aforementioned Checkmate is somewhat anthemic, to the point where I can really picture this being a live staple in the band's career moving forward. And I like the distinctly southern flavor emanating out from Lamb of God in the guitar licks and in the riffs on this number, giving it that extra little dose of pure American metal spirit and authenticity. Another great example, the track Rooch, which builds upon a very blatant crossover thrash bass with some very subtle atmospheric bits and pieces borrowed from the most recent Gojira record and some demonic howls courtesy of Chuck Billy from Testament. Or the track Poison Dream featuring Jamie Josta of Hatebreed, which allows Randy the very rare opportunity to completely indulge in his classic punk and hardcore roots. And even when Lamb of God do resort to what some might call the typical Lamb of God blueprint, I'm honestly still having a pretty fun time. Like tracks like Memento Mori, Gears, even the aforementioned New Colossal Hate, musically speaking, may not be particularly inventive, but Lamb of God's particular sound still feels unique enough to them that I'm having a fun enough time, and Lord knows I'm going to be headbanging like a motherfucker to some of these tracks live. I do wish that the album ended on a more climactic note in the vein of Resolution's King Me, and I do also wish that Art Cruz was given a little bit more room to breathe and didn't have to stick so heavily to Chris Adler's signature drum style on this record. But all things considered, I did enjoy this record, and as such, I've no issue giving it a 3.5 out of 5. The additional flavors found mixed within this record probably would not be enough to convince a naysayer to give this band another shot, but they are enough to keep the diehard Lamb of God fans happy and deliver upon everything that I think they expect from a Lamb of God record. Honestly, the only issue I foresee going forward is how fans will react to the band's more outspoken political aspirations on this record. But that being said, if I'm not losing a lot of sleep overnight over the concerns of angry white Americans, then I'm willing to bet that Lamb of God and the record label aren't either. 3.5 out of 5. When I look back at the entire discography, it probably does rank as my least favorite record, but I still think that there are enough big meaty grooves, enough anthemic hooks, and enough new changes to keep the people who still love Lamb of God, political warts and all, satisfied through and through. Maybe don't check it out right away, since there are a lot of amazing records coming out this weekend, but do check it out nonetheless. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately, and you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.